Hi, this is Macnab-Stark from The Art of Screenwriting, and we're going to talk today about characters, about developing great characters for your screenplays. Whether you're somebody who comes at a story from the direction of plot, that you have a plot idea first, or you start off with characters, you still have to develop great and compelling characters, because those are what take the audience through the story. Your character will carry an audience through the story. And so as a writer, you have to figure out a way to make sure that you can develop interesting characters. There's all sorts of ways of doing that. I've certainly encountered some strange ones in my time. I worked with a girl one time when I asked her how she developed her characters. She said that she wrote monologues, 100-page monologues from her characters in the character's voice. That worked for her in terms of understanding the character, but she found it very difficult to translate that into something she could actually use in the screenplay. And the reality is that we need something that when you're writing that script, you can bear it in mind the whole time when you're writing that character to develop it. A lot of people develop very long biographies, everything back to what their character ate for breakfast when they were a kid. If that helps you to understand the character, that's great, but again, it's not necessarily going to translate into something you can use when you're writing. The one thing that I have found that works for me again and again is developing character traits. These are a limited number of key things about the character's personality that you can bring out when you're writing. Because when you're writing a screenplay, you don't have the luxury of a novelist. In a novel, you can use a lot of internal dialogue to tell us what the character is thinking. In a screenplay, you can't do that. The only way that you can show character is through what your character does, through what your character says, and also to a certain extent by how other characters react to them or how other characters talk about them. The first two are the most important. And what you need to make sure is that when you're writing your screenplay, everything your character says and everything your character does expresses those key traits in their personality. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit about some key traits for a particular character. And I'm going to give you an example here of a character that I worked with for a client. And he first came to me, and one of the biggest issues in his screenplay, and it's a very, very common problem with screenplays, is that the protagonist, the main character, who should be the most interesting character, who should be the character who draws us through the screenplay, we travel on their journey with them, was bland. He was vanilla. And I see that a lot in screenplays that I read. So when I asked him to describe his character, these are the traits that he came up with. He said he was a natural leader, he was virtuous, he was calm under pressure, and he was witty. Those are all admirable traits, but when you put them together, what you have is a character who is so bland and so uninteresting that he would practically squeak if you rubbed him with a cloth. What you want is a character who has nuances, who has interesting things about them. If you take a character like Indiana Jones, he certainly has some negative characteristics to him. He can be quite selfish, he's quite impetuous, but as a character, we're fascinated by him. So what I did with my client is we sat down and we did a bit of brainstorming about this character, his hero, who was called Chris, and we came up with some different characteristics. So what we changed him to, still a natural leader, very focused and determined, but we added two interesting character traits to this character. First of all, we made him impetuous. Someone who is impetuous is always going to be interesting because you're never quite sure what they might do at any given situation. The other thing we added as a characteristic was we made him unfaithful, deceptive. Now that might not be something you would want in your spouse or your best friend, but in a character in a story, it makes them much more interesting. It also, crucially, provides room for that character to change and grow. Because all good characters, what we want to see is that that character is going to change and grow throughout the story. If they are virtually perfect at the start of the story, there's nowhere for them to go. In this case, we gave this character somewhere to change. That was the fault line along which his personality was going to change. The other thing about having these types of traits in your character is that they provide room for conflict. Conflict drives stories. You've got to have conflict in your story. So when you have character like this, where you've got a trait of impetuous, you've got a trait of deceptive or untrustworthy, these are now things that will provide conflict with other characters, and that can help drive your scenes along and drive your screenplay along. So if you are stuck and you're developing your characters, my suggestion is to focus in on 4 or 5. If you've got more than that, it becomes hard to write. Focus in on 4 or 5 key character traits, and then keep those in mind when you're writing those characters. Because theoretically, everything that character says or does should represent one of those 4 character traits. So ultimately, this story was about whether this character Chris could learn to be faithful and trustworthy. So that gave us room for the character to grow and to change. So my recommendation is that when you are developing your characters, you really think about the essence of that character. What is at the heart of that character? What drives that character? What are the key parts of their personality? Limit it to 4 or 5. If you wind up with 6, 7 and 8, you wind up with a diffuse character that's hard for you to write. Keep it down to 4 if you can, 5 if you, 5 at the most. And use those as you go through the story. Use those when you're writing dialogue. Use those at those moments when you're not sure how that character acts. And what you'll find is you get tightly focused characters that you understand and you know how to write for them. Thanks for listening. This is Don Macnab-Stark from The Art of Screenwriting. Please check out the website at www.theartofscreenwriting.com. Feel free to sign up for the newsletter or send me an email and let me know if there's any other subjects you'd like me to cover in the future. Thanks a lot and keep writing.